Why do so many ancient sites sit in or near the 33rd line of latitude? And why have so many historic events of our modern world throughout the 20th century taken place along that same line? When we factor in connections to secret societies, the number 33 shows up time and time again in the most bizarre and thought-provoking ways. Is this nothing more than coincidence, or might there be an altogether more esoteric reason? We should highlight here the research of Gary David, who wrote of some of these apparent coincidental locations in the book The Disinformation Guide to Ancient Aliens, Lost Civilizations, Astonishing Archaeology and Hidden History. He would start by highlighting the city of Phoenix in Arizona, which sits on the 33rd latitude and was once home to the ancient civilization called the Hohokam. The largest hub of the civilization is known as Snaketown, whose name is an interesting connection to the importance of the serpent in ancient times in general, and which sits almost perfectly on the 33rd line of latitude. At this cultural center of the Hohokam civilization was an advanced astronomical observatory, as well as evidence of a highly advanced irrigation system that covers over 500 miles. If we move along the same line of latitude across the Atlantic Ocean, we find ourselves at the ancient seaport of Tyre, which was part of the Phoenician Empire that stretches back to around 5000 BC. It doesn't take the most eagle-eyed person to see the similarities between Phoenix and Phoenicia. A further intrigue, one of the products that this particular port was famous for was dye that was very distinct purple color, whose name translates to Phoenix and is often the color used to represent the American city today. It perhaps shouldn't surprise us to learn that other ancient cities reside along this 33rd latitude. Baghdad in Iraq, for example, which was once where Babylon and the ancient cities of Mesopotamia stood, a region where multiple ancient temples and structures also reside, sit on the 33rd latitude. If we head further along this line, we come to the location of the White Pyramid in the Xingling Mountains in China. Not only does this pyramid structure exist here, but it's also close to where the famous terracotta warriors stand. Back in the United States, there are other remains of ancient peoples that sit close to this seemingly all-important line of latitude. The ancient city of Moundville, for example, near the Black Warrior River in Alabama, is one of these. And what's more, many of the structures here are almost identical in influence to those of the Hohokam found in the Valley of the Sun near Phoenix, Arizona. Another location near the 33rd latitude is the Poverty Point State Historic Site near Lake Providence in Louisiana, a site thought to have been built almost 4,000 years ago. Further locations include Greenville, Mississippi, and the Winterville Mounds, or the Etowah Indian Mound State Park in Cantorsville in Georgia, where there are also geoglyphs near the Colorado River. All of these mysterious locations reside on the 33rd latitude. In short, the sheer number of ancient locations around the world, as well as many such locations of ancient cultures throughout the United States, are too many for us to ignore. What did these ancient cultures know that we have seemingly since forgotten? It's not just ancient buildings or cities that reside along the 33rd latitude that is of interest to us here, though. Once more, returning to the work of Gary David, the number 33 is of apparent importance in general. For example, if we examine what is arguably one of the biggest turning points in world history, the dropping of the atomic bombs over Japan that ultimately brought the Second World War to an end, albeit by ushering in the nuclear era, we find the discrete influence of 33 here. The president who authorized the strike was Harry S. Truman, who just happened to be the 33rd president of the United States. What's more, Truman became president when his predecessor, Franklin D. Roosevelt, passed away from a cerebral hemorrhage at Warm Springs in Georgia, a location that is only 10 miles from the 33rd line of latitude. Even stranger, the testing grounds of the atomic bombs in New Mexico lie on the 33rd latitude. While the 33rd latitude also runs through both Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the unfortunate destinations of these monstrous weapons. But by 1947, only 2 years later, UFO sightings were being increasingly reported around the planet. Of more importance, the infamous crash at Roswell took place in the summer of that year. Coincidentally or not, Roswell also sits on the 33rd latitude. If we keep extraterrestrial visitors in mind for just a moment longer, 50 years after the Roswell incident came the equally infamous Phoenix Lights encounter, which saw hundreds of people witnessed what appeared to be a mammoth V-shaped craft hovering over Phoenix, Arizona. And as we know from earlier, Phoenix sits on the 33rd latitude and would appear to be more important in the big picture of our collective reality than we could possibly suspect. So, to who might the number 33 be important? The most obvious answer to that question would be the Freemasons, whose most prestigious level, unofficially at least, is the 33rd degree. It is perhaps worth noting that the S in Harry S. Truman's name, who was also a Freemason, was said to be Solomon. There are many other seemingly bizarre connections to the importance of the number 33. For example, according to the temperature scale devised by Sir Isaac Newton, water boils at precisely 33 degrees. The human spine, which essentially connects the physical body to the brain, is made of 33 bones or vertebrae. If we look at the lunar calendar cycle, those that don't use some form of intercalculation, the use of an extra day in a leap year, for example, goes through a 33-year cycle. Let's remind ourselves once more of the coincidence of the 33rd President of the United States, who authorized the dropping of the first nuclear bombs in history on two cities that sat on the 33rd latitude after testing them at a location also on the 33rd latitude, being in a position to do so following the death of his predecessor at a location also on the 33rd line of latitude. And when we remind ourselves that both Truman and Roosevelt were both Freemasons, the notion of coincidence appears to be on increasingly shaky ground. When we look a little further into these Masonic connections, perhaps to the next biggest turning point of the 20th century, the moon landings, we find their influence all over the mission, a mission which left for its lunar destination, incidentally, from none other than Launchpad 33. Even the landing site at the time of the landings for the Apollo 11 moon landing mission was seemingly worked out with the number 33 in mind. According to the records, exactly 33 minutes after Apollo 11 touched down on the lunar surface, the three stars of Orion's belt would be perfectly aligned with the moon's horizon. And Orion was particularly important in ancient Egyptian rituals, which in turn has almost certainly heavily influenced Masonic rituals.